as this if you want it. Oh. Right. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Can you hear me at the back? Yes? The last time I gave a paper in Chichester was at the Festival Theatre. I said vagina and 3 people worked out, and I pointed out that Burke meant fuck and someone else went. There's no swearing in this though, so we've got all that out of the system. So I'm a bit rude about 3 Sussex towns, so yeah, if you're a resident there, you can wait until then. As we know, in 1853, George MacDonald resigned from his position as pastor of the Independent Congregational Church in Arundel. Colin Manlove, in his 2016 biography of MacDonald, claims that he was forced to resign over, quote, his liberal and heterodox theological ideas. What Manlove ignores or omits, and he also mistakenly states that MacDonald was appointed to Arundel Parish Church, which is appointed correct later in the book, is that MacDonald left after his stipend was reduced to such a degree that he was unable to support himself and his wife of 2 years, Louisa Powell. It's true that the stipend appears to have been reduced as a result of unhappiness with MacDonald's preaching and his theological views, but we should not ignore the cash element. Near penury forced a number of key decisions in MacDonald's life, as we heard in Francesca's paper this morning before lunch, and it positions him within the world of literary and cultural production, apparent in British society since the 18th century from the rise of the novel and its consumption by a leisure class. But the 19th century saw an exponential growth in readers and types of literature does not detract from the often parlous situation of many writers. We may think of Andrew Lang's eclectic career and how far money is often a driving factor. But this question remains about what offended the congregation in Arundel, what essentially ended MacDonald's clerical career. Was it just an Arundel thing? Arundel remains a very strange town. Not just a carbuncle which has to be driven through in order to travel between Chichester and Brighton and beyond, whose plaintive sign, Arundel open for business at the point at which the dual carriageway dies, may be read as a cry for help. No, theologically, Arundel retains echoes of its Reformation past. I'm reliably told that when they take umbrage, when members of the Roman Catholic congregation of the cathedral take umbrage with the dean of the cathedral, they go up the road to the Anglican church for several weeks. Either the vicar believes in transubstantiation or the Roman Catholics don't. I'm also reliably told that one of the nonconformist ministers refused to go to the churches together meetings if the Roman Catholic parish priest was going to those meetings. So the Reformation continues in these small towns. We've heard from Bethan about the suspicions around MacDonald's views of hell and how there was this taint of popery around his ideas that people might feel that there might be some type of purgatory there. There's more, of course, to MacDonald's strange theology. Manlove argues for the influence upon MacDonald of contemporary German liberal theology, including David Friedrich Strauss's Das Leben Jesu, which had been translated by George Eliot in 1846. Reaction to Strauss's book was electric. The Earl of Shaftesbury called it the most pestilential book ever vomited out of the jaws of hell. It's a review, you know. Strauss claims the miracles in the New Testament are mythical, what Manlove calls poetic versions of the truth. Christ's life is not supernatural, rather it is exemplary. Manlove argues for MacDonald's move towards Unitarianism following his departure from Arundel, and thus a rejection of Christ's divinity, original sin, the fall, and predestination. In one sermon, MacDonald declares, "I believe in nothing but the Lord revealed in Christ." As such, the Gospels become central, and the rest of the Bible fades into the background. It appears in the unspoken sermons. The one use of the Bible is to make us look at Jesus. In a letter to his father in April 1853, so after the reduction of the stipend, before the family left Arundel, MacDonald states, "God is our loving, true, self-forgetting friend. All delight, all hope and beauty are in God. Leave the epistles and ponder the gospel, the story of Christ. Infinitely the epistles mistaken because the gospels are not understood, because Christ is not understood and felt in the heart, because readers of the epistles too often possess nothing but that sympathy with Christ's thoughts and feelings and desires." So it looks here like a denial or downgrading of Scripture, or some Scripture, not the Gospels, which of course would make MacDonald's life much easier as a preacher, as he'd only be working with the Gospels. But it wouldn't endear him to a congregation born of sola scriptura, tota scriptura. A month later, again still in Arundel, MacDonald writes to his father, the first thing is to know Jesus as a man, and any theory about him that makes him less of a man but the foolish notion of exalting his divinity I refuse at once. Now this is Strauss, so already you can see the problems that MacDonald must be having in Arundel. He continues, far rather would I be such a Unitarian as Dr. Channing than such a Christian as my far the greater number of those that talk about his divinity are. The former truly believes in Christ, believes in him far more than so-called orthodox. So in fact, Mandler's probably wrong in dating the Unitarian feelings until after he leaves Arundel clearly as a statement of Unitarian belief here. Just over 2 weeks later, MacDonald, again writing to his father, this time from Worthing, repeats a comment by Godwin, Professor of Systematic Theology and New Testament Exegesis at Highbury, who I think is engaged to Louise's sister by this point. He, that is Godwin, says they cannot understand me in Arundel, and little wonder if he's exposing those type of views. 2 years earlier, there's an intriguing statement by MacDonald, which adds to the odd collection of beliefs which he seemed to espouse, which also allows for the positioning of MacDonald's theological difficulties within a wider geographical and religious controversy. He says, writing to his father, this is April of 1851, he states, the word doctrine as used in the Bible means teaching of duty, not theory. I preached a sermon about this. We are too anxious to be definite and have finished, well-polished, sharp-edged systems, forgetting that the more perfect a theory about the infinite, the surer it is to be wrong, the more impossible it is to be right. He then continues with, I am neither Arminian nor Calvinist. To no system could I subscribe. Now the start of the quotation, back at the screen, suggests the rejection of established belief that we've seen elsewhere, with Wilson in MacDonald's correspondence, and abandonment of doctrine in its conventional understanding replaced by a far more individual approach to a relationship with God. But the statement, I am neither Arminian, neither Arminian nor Calvinist, while a repetition of a formula used by MacDonald's father in a letter to MacDonald in May of 1850, like you, I cannot by any means give in to the extreme points either of Calvinism or Arminianism, is odd and unexpected in the context of the mid-19th century. And I'm not quite sure what MacDonald means by Arminian, and I'm not sure he necessarily knows either, because Arminian is one of those difficult historical terms. Arminianism as a term stems originally from the 17th century Reformed provinces. It enters the English language in 1618 as a term of abuse. Originally, it's a term applied to the followers of the Dutch theologian Jacob Arminius, who died in 1609. Arminian thinking marks a partial break with the dominant Calvinist thought of much of the Reformed provinces, with variations in the following key areas. So, the accusation is they reject, they believe in universal atonement, they believe in resistible grace, they believe in the possibility of lapsing from grace, and while not exactly free willers, they're much closer to a position that allows limited volition on the part of the believer. Now, Arminianism in the Dutch context becomes politically charged during the struggle for power that took place in the provinces in the 1610s, so after Arminius dies, which culminates in 1618-19 with the Synod of Dort, the execution of the leader of the Arminians, Johann van Oldenbarnevelt, as part of a power grab by Maurice, Prince of Orange, and the arrest and execution of Barnevelt's followers. When the articles of the Synod of Dort were published, they were defined as Calvinist, a clear rejection of the Arminian position. Arminianism entered English religio-political discourse as a term of abuse as both sides of the Dutch debate had sought the assistance of James I, which leads James I in 1611 to describe Arminius' positions as pestilence and a cockatrice's egg. The problem is James hadn't actually read any of this work. It had been read for him, probably by George Abbott, who had just been made Archbishop of Canterbury, who's very Calvinist and really doesn't like what he sees coming out of Arminius and his followers. James's decision to accept an invitation to send a delegation to the Synod of Dort, and the subsequent attempts by some hotter types of English Protestants to incorporate the Articles of Dort into the Church of England, imported the debate and saw Arminianism introduced as a term for crypto-papistry. And that's how it's understood in England. So here is a picture, 1642, sound head, rattle head, round head. Interestingly, in 1642, the round head isn't parliamentarian, it's actually the Catholic monk. This figure, though, is clearly an Arminian. Clearly, you can't see it too far away, but if you call up the picture, you can see. And here is a stout Calvinist. So when the two MacDonalds are talking about Arminianism and Calvinism, kind of dichotomy, they're connecting with this historical view of it. Ratcliffe he's moving back and forth between the two positions. So in 1819, a group of texts were published in England about the fall of Barneveld, which constructs the former Arminian leader as a tool of the Spanish in their attempts to retake the reformed provinces. The first English Arminian is Richard Montague, who would become Bishop of Chichester after the controversy that he starts in 1624-1625, when he publishes tracts called a Paleo-Caesarium and a New Gag for the Gospel, in which he questions why Calvin and Calvinism have such a prominence in the Church of England. Why, asks Montague, Calvin over Luther or anyone else? This crystallises the idea that anyone who deviates from Calvinist theology, Calvinist orthodoxy, is suspect, if not a hidden papist, then certainly a fellow traveller working against the religio-political state. And that's how Arminianism is treated in texts throughout the 1620s and then into the 1640s. So we have this, Francis Ross, who's an MP, 1626. Arminianism is a kind of twilight and double-faced thing that looks to two religions at once. Arminianism is like a flying fish. If preferably among the birds, he's ready to fly after it. If it be among the fishes, then among the fishes he will swim after it. It's little thieves who enter into the window of the church and thereby unlock the doors and let in all popery. There's not a policy more advantageable to the Spanish than he bringing division into a land by bringing in Arminianism. The very council have been given to the King of Spain for the destruction of England and the Low Countries, bringing this doctrine which now has gotten the name of Arminianism. And Rose hasn't finished. 1629, so 1626, 1629, he's still on. The Arminian is the spawn of the Papist, the Trojan horse to open the gates to Romish tyranny and Spanish monarchy. This then turns up word for word in 1641 when Parliament reopens after the wars against Scotland. It's called a religious and wordy speech, laying open the paintings that are used for the whore of Rome and Arminianism among us to draw the people thereby to idolatry, by which means they seek both to take away our wealth and our religion. And that's how Arminianism appears. Look at the long, the sermons given to the long Parliament. Arminianism, when it turns up, is always connected with heresies or is always used as a type of synonym for popery, for papistry. Once, however, the authority of the established church collapsed at the Civil War, and once the re-establishment of the established church was only partly achieved in the 1660s and 1670s, a genuine English Arminianism, that is, a set of beliefs, not just this depiction of Arminianism, begins to emerge, with Arminian-inspired debates and statements of belief among Baptists, congregations, and crucially between Methodists and Wesleyans. But even within that wider context, it's very hard to see what the MacDonalds meant by the extremes of Arminianism and Calvinism. Certainly the idea of Arminianism being extreme. In most political discourses, Arminianism looks like a comforting brother to Calvinist hardcore Protestant theology. I think it's probably something to do with issues around predestination, original sin, and the question of salvation. We've seen throughout a number of papers today that MacDonald is moving towards a position of universal salvation. Even the kind of limited free will that's allowed by Arminianism, the kind of reduction in predestination, still allows for the possibility of people falling from grace. That's too much, I think, for MacDonald. So pitching Calvinism with Arminianism is a way of positioning himself away from this idea that people will go to hell. It's still very odd to see Arminianism turn up when it does. And his use of a Reformation term like Arminianism does allow us to position MacDonald's problems in Arundel within a county-wide crisis of Protestantism taking place in the 1850s. We can see the results of this crisis most clearly in the treatment of another Christian thinker, John Mason Neale, author of Good King Wenceslas, the translator of O Come, Emmanuel, and the warden of Sackville College. There is Sackville College, and very pretty it is too. Sackville College is located in East Grinstead, which is another odd Sussex town. This one is right up on the Surrey border. It should be in East Sussex, but was left in West Sussex when they split the county for administrative purposes in the 1970s. And if you look at it historically, in terms of its hard Protestantism, its connections with the iron industry, and the fact it's got some Protestant martyrs, it really should be in the east of the county. It's the home of the Bluebell Railway, and to one of Peter Andre's coffee shops, and it's the British base of Scientology. It's also the type of town where a person can be told, Eileen, you're a lovely woman, but you're going to hell because you're a Roman Catholic. I know that's true, I know the Eileen she told. It's also a place where the phrase, the poisonous aftermath of the Reformation, prompted complaint because, and here's the quotation from the person who made the complaint, the Reformation is the basis of all English liberty. Think about that. And I know because I was the person who said that poison's aftermath of the Reformation. I was the person to whom the complaint was made. The person making the complaint then came and said, could I use your research as a family history project? So yeah, the poison's aftermath of the Reformation is a dangerous sentence. The poison's aftermath of the Reformation was still apparent in East Grinstead in the 19th century. In 1813, several inhabitants of the town petitioned Parliament to oppose Catholic attempts to re-enter British political and military life from which they'd been barred under the Penal Laws. The petitioners felt it their bounden duty to resist their endeavours to get possession of political power and legislative authority, and thereby to destroy that Protestant ascendancy to which the people of this country are indebted under Providence for the establishment of their liberties in a firm and solid basis. On and on it goes in Indian fashion. In November of 1850, a public meeting in East Grinstead urged the Queen and the Bishop of Chichester to curb Catholic assertiveness, because the Queen's got nothing better to do than look what's going on in this country. Neil was a sickly man who'd been briefly vicar in Crawley and then had to leave the country for his health. And if you've ever been to Crawley, you may know the feeling, and I know because I live in Crawley. He was made warden of Sackville College, which at this time was an almshouse. Now it's a private school. In 1855, 1857 and 1858, Neil found himself under attack by the public and in the local press as a result of suspicions regarding his activities at the college. Neil had closed the chapel to the general public, and of course this set off the fetid imaginings of the locals, because he was reordering the chapel as well. His obvious high church tendencies and his relationship with the Sisters of Mercy at St Margaret's Convent, which was an Anglican religious community, were all viewed with suspicion, filtered through long-standing animus towards Roman Catholicism or anything that looked Catholic, and described in the most virulent and historic anti-Catholic language. So again, as with the concerns about MacDonald's belief in hell and possible predestination, we find a recourse to anti-Catholicism in Sussex. So Neil was investigated, proper investigation in 1855. And although complaints about Neil's stewardship were varied, the account of the inquiry and its reporting in the press revealed a suspicion that Neil had introduced Romish practices at Sackville. A major point of controversy was the role of the Sisters of Mercy, who were performing medical duties at the college. For some, the sisters, with their, quote, peculiar attire, grey dresses with a large cross suspended from the neck, that's from the Brighton Gazette in 1855, looked like Roman Catholic nuns. Although Neil survived the inquiry, the newspaper reports in both local and national papers are extraordinary. I think this might be the next one. Yeah, here we are. Oh no, that's skipped ahead. These are from the West Sussex Records. The Brighton Gazette for October the 4th, 1855 described the college under Neil as being suspected of being a seminary for religious perversion. You can get the old standing here of making out that Catholics are some type of sex fiends, drifts over there and use some perversion. Mind you, give us on October the 18th, the Gazette accused Neil of papistic tendencies. The Brighton Examiner, taking umbrage with the Gazette, accused the latter of describing Neil as being a Romish in disguise and a wolf prowling amongst the sheep. However, the Examiner, having made that complaint against the Gazette, then accused Neil of being part of the, quote, Romish party scarcely now in disguise in East Grinstead. In the opinion of the Examiner, Neil had attempted to convert this Protestant charity into another of these stepping stones to Rome, of which there are far too many already in this land. It's October 1855. The latter statement, of course, the Examiner is connecting Neil with the Oxford movement. And that's the key when discussing disquiet among Sussex Protestants in the 1850s. The Oxford movement had already caused considerable alarm in Sussex. The conversions of Newman in 1845, but particularly Henry Manning in 1851, had prompted the Lewis school teacher, Low Church preacher, antiquarian and founder of the Sussex Archaeological Society, Mark Anthony Lower, to create the Lewis Bonfire Society. So we always assume the bonfire societies go back to the 17th century. Although bonfires aren't used in a similar way, the bonfire societies themselves are a product of this moment in the 1850s. After Lower publishes a book in 1851 called The Sussex Martyrs, which is the book and the bonfire societies are a means of reminding Sussex of the danger posed by the Roman Catholic Church. Manning's conversion was a particular concern as he'd been the Archdeacon of Chichester. So here is the ending of the Dean on the doors. The bonfire societies who combine recollection of the martyrs with the gunpowder plot, because the martyrs aren't burned in the barrels, the reason you have the barrels for the Bonfire Society is to recall the later attempted Catholic atrocity, are intended to reaffirm the historical and ongoing threat posed by Rome. Sussex alone among counties in England has a cult of Protestant martyrs. Although Kent saw more burnings during the Marian period, there is no notion of the Kentish martyrs. You do have it in Sussex. But this 19th century cult created by Lower was based upon a reading of John Fox's Acts and Monuments. As such, the Sussex martyrs were and continue to be incorrectly celebrated as a single uniform body with uniform beliefs. However, the idea of a homogeneous 16th century county Protestantism was politically expedient for the creators of the construct of the county martyrs. For the proponents of the cult, it was the deaths of the Sussex martyrs at the hand of the Marian authorities which were of paramount importance. When faced with a resurgent Roman Catholicism in England, bolstered by an increased Irish Catholic population, migrant population, Lower turned to a local manifestation of historic Roman Catholic tyranny in order to warn against the apparent acceptance of popery. Lower was also influenced by his friend John Henry Purvis, the engraver, and co-founder of the Sussex Archaeological Society. Purvis produced an engraving of a very famous local picture of the burnings that take place in Lewes in June 1557, where 10 people were burnt on one day. This print, according to Christopher Whittock, who used to be the chief archivist over in East Sussex, became a virtual icon in the dissenting homes of the county. When the county means Sussex, of course, the whole, not just East and West. Recall of the burnings of Protestants in Lewes in 1557 and other burnings in Sussex during the reign of Mary thus served as a symbol of dissent and also a means of reminding the population of Sussex of past Roman Catholic violence and enforced doctrinal conformity. It is this fear of crypto-papistry and historical papist violence which results in the suspicions directed at Neil. East Grinstead, like Lower stamping ground of Lewes, was peculiarly receptive to conspiracy theories around the Oxford movement, as there had been 3 burnings there in 1557. 2 unnamed men, and there's a woman called Anne Mother Tree who was burnt on the same day. So, yeah, that's fine. I've paged through that. Following the end of the inquiry in 1855, Neil defended his position in a pamphlet. The result was his condemnation at a public meeting in East Grinstead, which is this one here that I refer to. Neil was accused of having spent £2,500, which is proper money in 1855, turning Sackville's College's ancient and venerable Protestant chapel into a popish one with crosses, and then putting up 4 or 5 tinkling bells which were rung to the annoyance of the inhabitants, and which were not of the least earthly use. The Brighton Gazette described the meeting as the most numerous and influential one that ever took place in the small but pleasant town of East Grinstead. There's your TripAdvisor. The county court was crowded to suffocation, and members who were desirous of testifying their utter repugnance to the popish practice at the college were unable to obtain admission. Public condemnation of Neil was welcomed by the Brighton Protestant Association, but Neil was left in position at the college. So then they come after him again. So Neil's troubles continue in 1857 when he attended a funeral in Lewes. And it's interesting because Lewes is another town that's a bit like Royston Vasey, as we'll see now as we go on. So one of the sisters of the convent of St. Mary died. And her father had been a low church preacher in Lewes, so the funeral takes place in Lewes. Neil was accused, I think it's St. Anne's there, as you go in, you come in the top of Lewes, and that church in there. Neil was accused of attempting to give a Catholic blessing during the funeral service. What he'd actually wanted to do was give a private blessing, but this rumour goes out from the church down into Lewes town itself. And this results in a near riot. This mob come after Neil, chasing him down Lewes High Street, crying, "No popery here." Now you think this was Liverpool or Belfast, but this is Lewes in the 1850s. Although the county papers reported Neil's treatment with approval, still casting him as a dangerous crypto-papist and presenting him as an example of the dangers posed to the Church of England by the Oxford movement, the national and larger regional papers were more inclined to use words like mob and outrage when reporting the events. Sussex's resurrection of anti-Catholic feeling engendered by recollection of events in the county during the 1550s was starting to look idiosyncratic to many others. However, the campaign against Neil continued with, and the last slide here, with the 1858 inquest into the death of an inmate at Sackville College being used as an opportunity to remind readers of the local papers of the rumours, which of course they generated themselves regarding Neil and the college. So this is the Brighton Examiner. Death of an inmate from the alleged violence of a warden of Sackville College. Most extraordinary investigation. If you come to that and you remember a couple of years earlier, you think, that bastard papist Neil, he's killed one of those poor inmates. It's nothing of the sort. Neil is a witness at the inquest. It's one of the other wardens who's accused of this. You can see other papers are still keeping after Neil. Then they leave him alone. Bizarrely, because they haven't got him, they leave him alone and he dies. Where does that lead us? Well, we can see that MacDonald's problems in Arundel are minor compared to Neil's up in East Grinstead. Certainly he isn't chased up the High Street in Arundel. But it's telling us something about religion in the county and in the wider country at the time. Is it down to small town madness as well? Possibly. Is it religious hysteria? Maybe. Neil's case is different from MacDonald in that Neil's part of the established church, so he's a possible bigger problem if your concern is the spiritual subversion of the state. MacDonald, with his weird ideas and his nonconformist chapel, was less of an issue. Unless, of course, you were in the congregation of the chapel looking for spiritual guidance from a preacher, who, reading the correspondence of his father, appears to be abandoning all orthodox Protestant positions. We tend lazily here, when teaching the undergraduates, to point to 1859 and the publication of The Origin of the Species as the crucial moment in puncturing religious certainty and setting Britain on a path to challenging the meta-narrative of the Protestant state chosen by God. But actually the problems are much earlier than that. The Oxford movement, the pressures I should say, the Oxford movement, the unresolved nature of the Reformation, and continental theology all come into play along with the mind of an individual reader in the figure of somebody like MacDonald, in order to produce a challenge to orthodoxy, to introduce uncertainty, to ask people not necessarily to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast, but to at least challenge them to think about the natures of their beliefs. Thank you.
Alright, so next up is The Rainbow's Egg, a practice-led illustrative research dossier investigating thematic and theological correlations within the works of Lewis Carroll and George MacDonald. And I'll get it up here. So Adam Paxman presented at our Arthur Rackham conference last year, and it was really interesting, so I'm really looking forward to this. And Adam is a lecturer in graphic arts and contextual studies at Hugh Baird University Centre in Liverpool and in contextualising practice at Manchester Metropolitan University. And I'll just... That's it, I've finished.
I've got a bad cold, so I'm going to keep
Yeah,
sipping
definitely.
a drink. Otherwise, my voice will stop working. Is that going to... Have you clicked already?
I didn't know which one.
Oh, no, yeah, part one, yeah, sorry.
That one would have made sense if I thought about it.
Yeah, okay, so, I mean, I could have called this what I did on my summer holiday. Like when you were at school and they asked you, what did you do on your summer holiday? But I put this together. It's a physical dossier, I called it. It's a booklet, really, of illustrations. Doodles, sketches, illustrations, from, compiling these 3 sketchbooks, looking at George MacDonald and looking at Lewis Carroll, and some of the thoughts that came up from looking at those as an illustrator. I am a graphic arts tutor and contextual studies tutor, but my practice is in illustration quite firmly. So here we go. Quick note. I was a little bit derailed in the summer because my dad was diagnosed with inoperable cancer. So I've had about a week and a couple of weekends off where we've been to York and I've just been sat in the house not doing this. But otherwise, this is pretty much what I've been doing. So I'll put it in a little dedication. Because he's the one who used to sit and actually tell me stories that he made up when I was a kid about goblins and fairies and things like that. So I think he's the one that did the damage. And then, so just to introduce this, I looked at I put it into 3 sections, 3 themes. Thresholds, so the threshold between the world, whatever the world is, space reality, whatever you want to call that, and fairyland, whatever that is. Or Wonderland, if that's a different thing. Theology and ecology, so what can I see about the theology of these 2 writers just by looking at their work? And it is just my interpretation, so I'm sure everyone will disagree with me, it's fine. And then transformations as well. Theology and ecology is by far the biggest chapter. It just kept going, and you'll see why. Basically because I like drawing goblins. So I put this together just to help me, a sort of relative timeline So Lewis Carroll on the top, or well, Dodson, and then George MacDonald. Just sort of get a sense of when they were working, when they were alive, when they were working, when there was that kind of crossover period. And I drew those pictures of them, and I thought that was a nice hat. So, a table of themes. I put this together to help me. So I read through both Alice's, The Golden Key, The Light Princess, which I haven't got anything for, The Shadows, which I haven't got anything for, but which is brilliant, and I would like to do some stuff on it. The Giant's Heart, which has some okay stuff in it that I thought was interesting. Cross Purposes, which I love, and The Princess and the Goblin, which you'll see takes up quite a bit because I drew a lot of goblins. And so that was kind of me just, in terms of my practice, in terms of my research process, this kind of helped me organise it rather than having 3 sketchbooks on the go and trying to find individual pages. So yeah, I've done quite a bit of primary research. I went to Lady Lever Art Gallery in Port Sunlight, Wirral, where they've got some lovely items. I thought the angels might be useful for the end of the Golden Key when the forms are ascending the staircase or the rainbow. I thought the castles in the air statue on the right might be useful for Tangle in the Golden Key when she sat on a tall column at the end in the extra colour of the rainbow that he doesn't explain, which is really hard to do as an illustrator. I considered doing all the Golden Key stuff in black and white just to kind of fuck with everyone, but I didn't. I used Pinterest. I've got a bit of a love and hate relationship with Pinterest. I thought it'd be good to show students that it can be useful when I show this to my students. So I've got 3 boards on there. If you do want to have a look at the images that I've used, I have used them as references in some places. I've adapted them in some places. And that's why I was looking at pictures of Christina Hendricks, Anna, and Karen Gillan all summer. So thresholds. Started looking, and there's Anna, looking at the rabbit hole, and I realised very quickly the thought process when reading Alice, the threshold appears to be the rabbit hole, but it's not, because she's already asleep by that point. I think it might have been Fernando earlier who mentioned the white rabbit. I mean, the white rabbit is, in magic, it is used in simple conjuring magic. It's kind of totemic figure. He's anthropomorphic because he's got this little waistcoat on. That's the first thing that she sees that's curious, although she doesn't necessarily think it terribly curious to begin with, because she's in this sort of liminal state, this not quite conscious state, which Hayley was talking about earlier. So started to ask myself these questions. What do I believe Wonderland to be? Is it just Alice's dream? Is it fairyland? If it's a dream, it's of little consequence in the story, beyond inspiring Alice's sister to dream about Wonderland. So it's kind of passed along virally at the end of the story, and then to the readers outside of the fiction. So it's almost like an idea that it works its way in. If it is fairyland, is the threshold a rabbit hole, or is it that her actually falling asleep? And then, unlike George MacDonald's Fairylands, because they don't seem to be exactly the same one each time in his stories, Wonderland doesn't seem to have anything to do with heaven or an afterlife. I realise now that I'm completely wrong about that, but that's sort of my reading of it. A key difference in approach to fiction and theology I'm questioning there myself. These are sort of notes to myself as much as to anyone else. And white rabbits disappear and reappear in magic, there's a character in one of my things which I'll show you later called Pickle the White Rabbit, and she's a scientist, but I picked her to be a scientist because they use white rabbits in science. For vivisection they use them in magic, so I thought, what a great character, science and magic, white rabbit. I've got to get through Alice because I've only done about 3 slides on Alice and everything is George MacDonald. And then I've got this thing about sort of separation anxiety. Oh, and paralysis, this terrible joke on this page. Paralysis, this is because, as an illustrator, Alice has been done to death, I'm sorry to say, in front of members of the, But so many people have illustrated Alice that I didn't really consider there to be anything worthwhile me doing in 2 months. So instead I looked at it in terms of the sort of separation of the real world to fiction. So we've got the real boat trip in the prefatory poem, and then this fictionalized account, which is verbal. Then it gets featuring the real Alice Liddell to begin with, but then it becomes Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Underground, sorry. Then it becomes Wonderland when she's awake. So that's a different Alice to Alice Liddell. That's a slightly different Alice to the one in Underground, possibly, depending on how you view that. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland when she's asleep. She constantly says that I'm not the same person as I was earlier, and then she keeps transforming. She goes back and she's awake again. She tells her sister, unnamed sister, who's not Alice Liddell's sister, she's a fictional version of fictional Alice's sister, about this. Then she dreams about Alice having her adventure, but then she also dreams about herself having Alice's adventure in Wonderland, and then we are told to go and embrace and Alice in Wonderland have that adventure. So I sort of mapped it out in a sort of vaguely Subway, Massimo Vignelli way. Oh, is it slow?
At the end of that part one.
Oh, it's that. Yeah, that's part one. Sorry, I forgot that it's in many chunks. No. It was enormous. Where's full screen on here? Sorry. That one. Read mode. No. Oh no. Huh?
No, I don't know.
Tools. View.
That's true.
Full screen mode. Sorry, thank you. Sorry, I like Macs as well. You probably hate me for that as well. Okay, so yeah, threshold. So I started off with the golden key, the titular golden key. It mentions sapphires. I started with blue sapphires. Then I found out that there's all sorts of different types of colours of sapphires. And I started to realise it looks a little bit like Thanos' armour and glove, if you've seen the Marvel films recently. But then I started putting the other colours on, and I realised it started to look even more like Thanos' glove because he gets all these different stones. But I was looking at lots of different traditions and cultures. The British Museum website is brilliant, online collection for these sorts of quirky, strange things, and then I was adapting those away to give it something else. We went to Iron Bridge Gorge for my birthday, and I got some lovely iron keys there. Then in the Golden Key, a key threshold is the sunset. So it's sort of idea of light and dark, good and evil, life and death, liminal space. So I played around with that and started building up. You see these stripes of these palettes that I start building up. They won't make sense chronologically because I've done this this is not the chronological order that I produced it in, so you'll see the bar sort of appearing and disappearing. Nightingales and hibiscus as a way to symbolise sunset, because the nightingale is one of the birds that sings the longest into the night, and hibiscus will actually close up, so it's got sort of physical things that I can show as sort of totems of that passage of time. Some more of Iron Bridge Gorge. I think that's Anna approaching a little cottage, and then I sort of synthesised it into some images of Mossy's great aunt's house, where when the sunset is going to come down. Played around drawing rainbows is horrible because rainbows look awful when you draw. Trying to make them look solid as well, because it says things in fairyland are solid that here don't look solid, and then as soon as I started doing that, it just looked weird. And didn't read correctly, so yeah, you can see that it's like this weird gloopy thing. But I like the rain, because rainbow and rain, and actually the rainbow is there after the sun has set, which is, as far as I'm aware, impossible. And then you've got the mountain pass of Tangle going through the mountain, guided by the Aeranth, the fairy. So I started to play around with that, light and dark. Again, light and dark. We've got first fairy. Don't worry, there's more. So this idea of like a little bit of a sequence of being led into the mountain and through the mountain and then out of the mountain to the beach. So this just looks sort of foggy, but it's this idea of trying permanence and impermanence and layers and things. Not sure it's terribly successful. That's the end of that one. View, full screen. The meat of this is theology and ecology. So, goblins, Princess and the Goblin, really enjoyed Princess and the Goblin. Well, parts of Princess and the Goblin, I'm going to be honest, it wasn't my favourite. I started looking at potatoes, shapes of potato, forms of potatoes, for the basis of like the goblins' bodies and heads and things. Salt Vampire from Star Trek. We've got Nosferatu. We've got eyes, mammals. We've got bats, ears, and things being synthesized into various little goblins. Different colourways, trying out different colourways. These sort of suckerish mouths I quite like. I like the idea of them being colourless because they live underground, so that they very rarely go out even in darkness. They don't really bother going out. So I like the idea of a caste system. They'll be the ones who are like the most colourless and possibly even sightless. So just playing around with this. And then the medieval attire, Japanese gourds, because I was watching loads of samurai movies. Sorry, Anna. Around my birthday, because I like samurai movies. So I was like bringing in some European stuff, medieval stuff, bringing in some Japanese stuff, and trying to synthesize it and make it coherent and make it make sense. These sort of getting there. I quite like these sort of twin guys in the tunnel. And then I started thinking, right, King and Queen. I didn't do hairlit because I thought it was vaguely offensive. Because I've got a hairlet. And so King and Queen, and a snub-nosed turtle. So there's all sorts of lizards and reptiles and blind cave fish being sort of put into these things and developing this palette. The king with this sort of horrible gherkin-like nose, a Shih Tzu's underbite. I thought that would be a great addition. I do love Shih Tzus. I've got nothing against Shih Tzus. I really like Shih Tzus. Yes. So that's the Queen. Tried the Queen a few different ways. Sort of this geisha type of, almost like a lip of colour, so kimono, swatch of colour. This horrible big head, and then sort of Celtic and Anglo-Saxon clothing. And actually, because the way George MacDonald writes, the adventure takes place over like quite a long time. It's not a single episode, so they'd actually need different changes of wardrobe and things, which is unusual for an illustrator because you're not identifying like with the Red Queen. You see the Red Queen in one outfit. Yes, in Alice you get the White Rabbit with a change of clothes, but it's pretty rare. You tend to have characters with a particular key look. And then the goblins have got this menagerie of these weird messed up animals. So I also got like really stuck into these. So there's a cat with horse legs, which just like Anna said, it was Amy, my friend. Amy said, make the horse's legs much longer. It's like, yeah, that would work. Yeah. Then I've got like all these different animals, like dogs and pigs and bears and wolves and hares. And I looked at Buto, Japanese Dance of Darkness faces, a particular practitioner, and I gave them all the same face because they're supposed to have these turnip carved faces. It's like, no, George MacDonald, you've gone too far. An illustrator can't possibly make that look like anything. So I'm just drawing him, pulling him back a little bit. When he goes to his excess. So we got some mushrooms growing in our house, weirdly, while I was doing this. apparently contaminated soil. That's what they tell us. Yeah, these horrible hybrid animals, tortoise with a cock crest, a duck with a face just sticking out of it. Horrible little hares with lizardy legs and stuff. It's nice just to stand here and just describe these things. It's like it's a form of therapy. Hebridean sheep, just because they're amazing and they look vaguely sort of satanic. Yeah, they're quite sad, aren't they? I quite like how sad they all are. They look like they're in pain, and that's what I wanted. I wanted them all to be in pain. Got a real sense of a responsibility when you create a character, you know. It's like, no, I want you to live in pain constantly. It's horrible. So yeah, I summed up some thoughts on a Princess and the Goblin, had a shaft of light there with this character, and moved on. So Golden Key, looked at some fairies. I thought about using old style 3D glasses. So I did a couple of little doodles of fairies with 3D effect, so that they do sort of seem to stand off the page. But none of you are wearing your 3D glasses. Ridiculous. So more, this is where Christina Hendricks and Karen Gillan come in. So I sort of thought, right, red-haired and mottling and freckles, because I'd been to the Liverpool World Museum, so with sort of these wings. I was looking at butterfly wings and moth wings, and I just sort of hated a lot of these shapes, and I wanted to make them more androgynous. Got to Tilda Swinton in the new Suspiria film, which a promo photo from that, which looked great, just this one, and more angelic and more unknowable and more powerful. I didn't want them to be twee, and I didn't give any of them pointy ears because I'm a huge fan of Star Trek, and I think it's offensive to take that away from Mr. Spock. Moth wings, so I did like multiple iterations of these moth wings. Then I went back and did the sequence that I showed you earlier, like going through the mountain. The more I did these things, I realized I didn't actually want to lock any of these down with actual finished illustrations. I wanted it to be doodles and sketches, because George MacDonald just suggests things to us to imagine for ourselves. And I think that was his intention. So I wanted to go, okay, guided meditation. This is maybe what he thought. Maybe this is, fill in the blanks. The Fairy Queen's Court Glade from Cross Purposes with some dappled light. I really like Cross Purposes. It's got more of a childish energy to it, and the characters are really nicely developed. There's kind of almost like a buddy comedy with Toadstool, the horrible little goblin, Pariah, and Peas Blossom, this sort of young, naive member of the fairy court. So Peas Blossom's all in green. She's got like leaf wings initially. And then I was like, right, I need to contrast her massively with the queen. So I was like, right, why would a fairy queen wear a crown? That's a human thing. So this is the first of the fairy queen designs, this more playful thing, get her away from some sense of like nobility or something regal, because at the start of the story she's just like, none of my people are fun, so I'll get some of my people to steal some children and they'll entertain me. But she's okay, she's not evil. And so yeah, I was looking like Mia Farrow, pixie crops. I mean, that is like a pun, I suppose. But pixie crops, different colour treatments on these, and just trying out different things. Obviously going a little bit too far on the sort of muddy effect on the right, but I was like, no, just leave it. Tried them with different headdresses and things, but from different cultures, and manipulated. So the centre one there, it's actually like a crown from a particular island, from the Andaman Islands, but I moved it down and made it into more of, obviously, to frame the face, almost like glasses or goggles. The idea of possibly this being like a nightingale feather. Sorry, I thought you were holding up 5 minutes. Are we okay for time?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So then we've also got Deborah Ann Wall from Daredevil, if you're a fan of True Blood. She's also accidentally featured in this. That's why I was looking at pictures of Deborah Ann Wallander. And Jane Fonda on the left here. I was starting to look at Barbarella, but I was like, no, Barbarella in all the promo pictures is way too confident. And I wanted Peas Blossom to be this naive, girlish, gangly, and that's why Karen Gillan was good, because Karen Gillan's a very attractive woman, but she's very, very, very tall and lean and kind of gangly in a lot of the pictures you see of her. So I was like, oh, yeah, maybe Karen Gillan. And there's this description of this lovely sort of golden beetle headpiece. I was trying to get like little bits of pea blossom and the loopy, almost like telephone wire stuff started to come into her design a bit more for Peas Blossom. And then there's this. Then there's Toadstool, and he's just like completely different. And I wanted this real sort of contrast of the two characters. So he is just like either caked in different fungi, or he's possibly made out of it. I never got round to drawing him bursting out of the molehill, and that's probably my biggest regret of the whole project, that I just ran out of time to do that. So the final section is literally 3 slides, and I've got just summing up. So I told you George MacDonald goes too far. How dare I? Who am I to say this? I say this as a professional illustrator. A flying fish was mentioned earlier. A flying fish is enough of a weird thing. It does not need the face of an owl as well. Thank you, George MacDonald, for making my life difficult. So I tried lots of different owl faces. I quite quickly found a black sea bass, and I was like, that's an interesting shape. You know, it's got these weird fins that kind of sort of go in with the fairy, because this creature then, out of a flying owl-faced fish, it jumps into a pot. Then its meat is consumed, and that gives them sensory powers. It just sounds like I'm insane if you say this stuff like that. And then the pot is opened, and the spirit of the animal. So George MacDonald thinking that animals have souls makes complete sense to me. Something that I wrote down. I was glad that came up earlier. That the soul of the animal or creature, the fish, comes out and is then transformed into this fairy, this Aeranth. So I just did some very sort of loose colour things with like this thing of this horrible weird fish like roaming through the forest. I was like, I've got to leave that where it is, because I'm going to take so long trying to get it right that I'm not going to get anything else done. So there he is. He's better fish to fry. And there's this whole thing of in fairyland, the animals, the highest purpose is to serve human beings. It's like, yeah, that's sad. I don't think vegans feel the same way, but I'd have to ask one. And very last thing is, so I took this, and I thought the rainbow's egg. The rainbow's egg comes from golden key. Is it the rainbow's egg? Is the golden key the rainbow's egg? Mossy asks his great aunt. She's like, oh, I don't know. Because she just makes up a load of stories that happen to come true only because they live next door to fairyland. Otherwise, she'd have just been a mad old woman who told him stories, and nothing would have happened, and I wouldn't be here because it would just be a boring story. So I took this and thought, right, how is this involved in my practice? What can I do to incorporate this into my practice? So I've got a blog called the Museum of Fragmented Shadows, which is about Victorian scientists in a dead science called teratology. It's now birth defects, but it used to mean literally the study of monsters. Cabinets of curiosities, Wunderkammer. This kind of stuff really gets me going. I find it really interesting. So these are a few pictures from years of different stories. I've got over 100 stories on this blog about Victorian monster scientists and weird, sometimes sexy monsters. And I said, right, I've realised that there's a big loose end with some of the stuff that I've been writing about these fairies in one strand. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to write sort of the complete story of this character, Klaus Olaf Fikri, and explain like what really happened to him, the untold story. And the working title is Revenge on Fairyland, so it's going to be like a bloodbath. It's going to be like Tarantino does Midsummer Night's Dream. Or Titus Andronicus, but with fairies. So yeah, another blog that I do, something that we want to look into publishing, my wife and I, Burning Zebra. So I've got these anthropomorphic characters, this whole world worked out. It's semi-autobiographical. Lots of my friends are characters. They have like animal avatars that have the same characteristics as them. Like one of my friends drinks too much, so he is a thespian cat who drinks too much. So it's, you know, life imitates art, art imitates life. It's pretty paper thin. It's not got an owl's face, I grant you, but it's kind of interesting. So, and every year for the last few years, I've been doing a Christmas, Advent daily story. So I split this. This is just the first scene. I split this into 9. So it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 being released every day on Instagram with a caption. So it was only once the scene was complete that you could actually see the full image, and then the next scene and the next scene. It's got a whole Trump thing in, so I'm not going to get political because you never know who you're talking to. But like the Christmas vampire is modelled on Trump. He's got like a cool like parsnip nose. But at the end of the story, the burning zebra, who I've been writing about for 13 years and is me, dies, and it's because last year I was diagnosed with stress, anxiety and depression, and I've realised that I've struggled with that my whole life. And so I went, right, I'm going to sort of mark this in some way, some personal way. And I was like, right, I'm going to kill the burning zebra. I'll bring him back in some other form, some way, something, but just to sort of mark this in my life, this kind of a threshold, if you like. So, and at the end of the story, that all these like weird baddies turn up, like because they finished the story, they finished this story, but the burning zebra is gone. And then these baddies turn up and they're like, right, we want to fight with the burning zebra. And then they're like, no, he's not here. And they're like, oh, okay, well, we'll come back next Christmas. Yeah, and there's Pickle the White Rabbit. So she's got like half black magician's coat and half lab coat because she's magic and science. Lots of references to old Victorian illustrations and things. And these bad guys are called the glutons because I'm gluten intolerant. So it's going to be about food ethics and gluten intolerance. Next Christmas, it's going to be a riot. And so yeah, bibliography. And I've got, very last thing, tailpiece, draw a little tailpiece with my faves, Peas Blossom and Toadstool. So they're punished at the end of the story of cross purposes. For Peas Blossom and Toadstool, they were both banished from court and compelled to live together for 7 years in an old tree that had just one green leaf upon it. Toadstool did not mind it much, but Peas Blossom did. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'm just going to get everyone up for questions.
And
Paul and Bethan, please.
And if anyone wants to have a look at the document, you've seen most of it. I think there's a few extra pages in the printed version, but if you do want to have a look at any of the stuff, because we've gone past it pretty quickly, just grab me later.
We're going to finish at 5:30, but you're welcome to hang out and like drain the tea and coffee and ask more questions after that. So.
Yes, Mr. Paxman.
Yes.
Can I implore you?
Yes.
You are such a brilliant, adorable, and extraordinary illustrator.
A sensible.
You must do an Alice.
Oh, okay. All right. Wow. That's not where I thought you were going to send me out.
Well, I'll just say all that. But yeah, no, you must do an Alice. You
Okay.
must, because yes, hundreds of people have done it.
But you put your own stamp on it. Is the
But
thing.
why? Yes. And the other thing I want to tell you is you're not the only illustrator to have problems with images that the writers created. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but Tenniel actually refused
Yes, the Wasp in the Wig,
to
famously, and
so
there was
it would be much
yeah.
easier for you to do Alice than that owl-faced fish.
Yes.
I rest my case.
I have drawn some Alice things before, years ago. One for my grandma, and I did in the 150th year. which is 2015.
Yeah.
It's 2015 question mark in a room of, yeah, sorry. I was part of a group exhibition, so I have done some, but I've never felt completely satisfied with the ones that I've done. So yeah,
Quite right.
I take up that challenge.
You start now, you might get it done.
I pick up the White Rabbit's gauntlet off the floor. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Kid gloves.
please.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
I'm sure you.
All right.
Oh, hang on, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask kind of about sort of Beth and Paul and Daniel from earlier about systems. Because Paul said, quoted from MacDonald's letter to his father, we're too anxious to have systems. To no system could I subscribe, which I think is really sort of important to MacDonald. And interestingly, it's exceptionally important to F.D. Morris and really goes through all of his theology, and you can read any of his stuff, and it's in theological essays, isn't it? About how don't time down for system. It's not about system, and if people often say F.D. Morris was a church person, but when they did that, he used to get really upset with them because he said, no, that's for the system. Don't do this to me. So you've got two people in this kind of sort of triad, F.D. Morris and George MacDonald, who are so anti-system that a lot of the time they won't even say they're universalists because they actually feel uncomfortable with any label. And then you've got somebody like Lewis Carroll, who is exceptionally systematic. So useless is his thing. Everything seems to have a space in place, and yet I think what you're saying, Bethan, and I would definitely agree with, is that there is something theological in Lewis Carroll and in George MacDonald that's coming from F.D. Morris about how space and time can be understood. And my question, if it is a question, is how is that tackled differently? The way George MacDonald looks at it, as somebody who, like F.D. Morris, is not a systematic person, and Lewis Carroll, who is extremely systematic. I know you sort of see it in their other works, like Lewis Carroll in his paper on eternal punishment. He kind of he's like chunk. There's a number and a letter for everything, and then you get to the logical answer at the end. But F.D. Morris, you come up, but like George MacDonald, more with a vague feeling about it. But how does that come out in the different fantasy works? Why do they end up feeling different, or why do they end up feeling the same even in some respects when they're coming from, in some ways, such a different mindset? That was a really long question.
Well, I think one reason they're the same is that they've all been influenced by Coleridge very much. And I think they are also influencing one another. I think probably that there's I mean, it's very hard to know what direction that's going in, and maybe if you're involved in that kind of relationship, you couldn't tell anyway, which of you initiated any particular thought. In terms of systems, I mean, Carroll wants to try and come back very much to the idea that it's just basically just about love, isn't it? So you don't need to, you don't need a sort of more complicated system than that.
If you ask a question about a system, you're part of the system, and that's the problem for MacDonald, isn't it? And that's why he wants the 8-year-old reader. He wants the 8-year-old in everyone, because you don't ask the awkward questions. You give us something the golden key, that weird time that's going on in there. If you start asking, well, how's that working there? You come the wrong way. So, yeah, he's trying to trap you by asking the question about systems. But yeah, I don't know, you can't see who's feeding on food there, really. So maybe they're a system that like reading each other's work anyway. So yeah, they're there for their own systems. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess there's two different conceptions of systems. There's lots of slippage there. So I guess we've got sort of systems that are sort of can look a bit neurotic and wanting to have everything under control in terms of understanding. So grand systems that explain the world and so on. I guess someone like the Duchess in Alice's Adventures might be a figure in which that's sort of satirised, where she's got such facile answers, everything's got a moral if only you look and think So that all comes together, and that seems very reductive, and it seems the opposite of this sort of principle of wonder that Francesco was talking about earlier. It's in the centre of the book. And I guess with something like mathematics, you've got a sort of formal system, something like Euclid, which is, you know, a compendium of a whole lot of sort of ancient and classical mathematical ideas, that does sort of introduce this really strange phenomenon of mathematics, whereby everything sort of comes together in these systems before experience, sort of a priori, yet somehow consistently manages to sort of be mapped onto empirical reality. So very, very strange relations. So that seems that sort of formal systems. It's sort of coherent in that mathematical way that isn't reductive. It's still a sort of a base about wonder. And then I guess there's also sort of very playful ideas of system in Carroll that sort of satirise or gently mock this sort of appetite for meaning. I think things like puns work like that. So that, you know, on the one hand, they're just ridiculous. There's coincidences of meaning, arbitrary meanings that converge on a particular word sign. But then they come out the other side where they sort of have significance and meaning, and the sort of nodal points for a whole new tentative cosmology that then collapses, and that's a sort of humorous effect, but very sort of charming, and seems to play on this idea, it seems to articulate this idea of wonder. And then I think someone like Joyce, in Finnegan's Wake, just grabs hold of it and runs with it, which is, so I just think, I think it's just, there's a sort of, it's like, I guess when we talk about religion, there's a sort of fundamentalist wing that seems to be about keeping things under control and getting safe. And then at the other end, there's a sort of mysticism or different things that are much more open experiences, sort of things that I think people were talking about with MacDonald, conformism.
You don't think this Fernando's question and then Matt's question and then we'll stop.
It's related to what they were talking about. In some ways, the more research I do into MacDonald, I see that a lot of his stories are based on Greek myth, except for cross purposes, every one of them. And so I'm finding that it's a system and it's got its own openness to other questions, but once we map it onto the story, like the Golden Key, once you know that Iris is involved as the guider of souls and the theology of the time, seeing the souls go into a pot and coming out, this tells you a lot of what MacDonald is getting at, which would probably guide the hand of any illustrator that would be aware of this other information. So that it gives you a system to follow. Of course, that's an open system too, because what were the Greeks up to then, right? And so on. And so with this information, then begin to narrow down this idea that in some ways, when you read the books, they seem, so original and so, where did he come up with this stuff? But then once you start pinning it down, then it's fixed. Like that is grounded in this Greek myth or Greco-Roman mythology. And so I'm wondering if would that help or hinder you?
Probably not now, because I finished the project. I've got to go back and be lecturer man now for another year. But yes, if I were to revisit this in time, I think I have an interest in Greek mythology, so I think exploring that aspect would definitely be helpful, and I think that point, illustrating that point, puns, the whole idea of that transformation is actually pointing out not just, that the animal is transformed, it's about the children are transformed and they go to the higher place, they go to the next life, but like multiple transitions. I'm constantly referring in my notes in there to this sort of non-binary relationship of life and death, which he's referring to. It's like there's multiple transitions between, because there's a point where it was a really sort of morose point in there where it's like, are Mossy and Tangle actually dead quite early on in the Golden Key? Because there's a point where they're talking to one of the men, the old man of the sea or one of the characters, and there's some line about her being dead, and it's like, and and I think with George MacDonald, a lot of it is deliberately there to be ambiguous so that we think and we puzzle and we wonder, and as you said earlier, wonder being a huge part of this sort of the great mystery, and putting you into this idea of a non-dogmatic view of the universe, where you can be creative and you can sort of be open-minded. But I absolutely take your point. Greek mythology, and there's going to be some Greek mythological characters in Burning Zebra as well. Psyche and Eros are going to turn up. So, for the kids.
All right, last question from Mark.
I was just picking up on something Daniel said in answer to the question about systems. With Dodson, I think he's comfortable with systems up to the point at which they become rituals. When it becomes a ritual, like in the quote I started with about making George MacDonald laugh when he's mocking people with their copybook maxims, which is where like the systems become the ritual. And certainly in his religious views, if when he chose which church he went to, for example in Eastbourne, he had one particular church. It wasn't the nearest one, it was one particular church he went to because the service was simpler. It didn't become ritualistic. I think that's the point at which he becomes it's personal to him in the religious case, and then it's humorous for him in the books. I just think that possibly that's something that Donald, or appealed to Donald when Dodson's expressing those views. I think Donald might have felt that was appropriate. Don't let the ritualistic side of it, or the process of it, get in the way of the faith for it.
Thank you. So a big round of applause for our final panel.